Hello there, beautiful friends. From around the world, I'm going to be your host, Blackenfist, and I welcome you to another Thought for Talk, of course, with my co-host, Qaaman. But I have two very special guests with you. We're going to have Geekdom.
Hi, I'm Geekdom. I do Dragon Ball videos.
And of course, we're going to have the person that makes Dragon Ball Dissection one of the greatest Dragon Ball retrospectives of all time, MistareFusion.
Good evening, or whenever it is you watch this video.
Yes, I'm very glad to have you on for this topic. And in fact, MistareFusion, this topic was semi-inspired by your Dragon Ball Dissection. If you guys haven't seen it, please go check it out. This Thought for Talk here is going to be more about Chi-Chi and her character, and how maybe the fans perceive her, and whether her perception is accurate or not. Because MistareFusion, you semi-inspired me for this topic, why don't you start it off? What do you think about Chi-Chi and her character throughout the series? And you could say she's not really a main character, she's a periphery character since we don't see her all the time, and the few times we do see her, we kind of see her in a certain light. But what do you think of her and how she is perceived in the fandom?
Well, I will say, just from a personal standpoint, as much as I leapt to her defense, or if I fell up to her defense in my video, I'm not really a big into agreement with the whole traditionalist kind of mindset and the perfect wifey mother type ideal that she's going for. Although I can sympathize with what she wants out of life and how that is completely wrecked by the life she ends up leading as an adult. I find her a bit more sympathetic than most people in the fandom tend to give her credit for, because quite honestly, she's just a bit too to be blunt, a bit too dumb and a bit too naive to really have known what she was getting herself into.
In a way, that makes her kind of like Goku.
Yeah, she's very much like Goku. I mean, they both have a similar type of hick rural dialects in Japanese. She and her father are both presented as sort of bumpkin type people. And she just really has this sort of romanticized but not very practical ideas of what love and romance are. So this kid comes in and kicks her in the crotch, and she decides for the rest of her life she has to marry this guy. It's almost kind of sad when you think about it that way. That
it worked for me.
It's almost kind of disturbing in a way. And she, chases this guy down, and 6 years later finds out she didn't even know what marriage meant when he said she was going to marry her. Then she ends up in a life with this guy who has no interest or idea of marriage. Spends the rest of her life trying to be a perfect mother to a son who happens to have freakishly strong power too, and is, rather than being a normal kid, is running off, risking his life, getting his bones broken by these supervillains who come out of the woodwork. And basically her life is nothing like she imagined it would be when she was reading magazines as a kid.
Well, Lance kind of took the words out of my mouth in the sense of what he's talking about Chi-Chi and Goku. That's one thing that's very lost on the different dubs. And I'm not just picking on the English dub, I mean also the Latin American dub, the Italian dub. The character of Goku and Chi-Chi is that they are basically very simple-minded bumpkins. They say words like, we would say ain't and things like that. Goku's like, destruction ain't my type of thing, as he says in the Japanese Battle of Gods. A lot of fans were kind of like thrown aback by that line. That's kind of weird. That's because they didn't know that, characters they are. So I do think Chi-Chi does get a little bit too much I don't want to say hate, but she does get a lot of dislike. She is kind of somewhat of a stereotype of certain Japanese mothers, but people forget that she was a tough chick. Obviously, she is a very skilled martial artist. We saw the kind of blow she was hitting Goku with. She's very fast. And somebody once asked me who would win between Chi-Chi and Mr. Satan, and that's a great question because I think Chi-Chi would give him a run for his money. So I think she is underrated.
Qaaman, what do you think?
We're always asked the question, is Chi-Chi a witch with a B? And the thing is, I've always felt that Chi-Chi has something about her that made you feel somewhat sympathetic for her. And the reason why is, if you think about the crazy lifestyle that this woman has, it's very, very, very hard to look up to it. And number one, her husband dies. Her kid is captured by a green alien and trained and taken away for a year. Then your husband is severely crippled by Saiyans later on. Then he says, okay, honey, I have to go in outer space to go save him from some tyrannical alien empire. You come back, and then your husband tells you, oh yeah, I have to train your son for these dangerous androids years later, and the super cockroach that's gonna come and try to absorb him and kill humanity. And then after that, later on, she has to deal with the pink monster, and she's essentially turned into an egg and squished. So when you look at it from that entire perspective of her life, she has such a stressful life for a wife that I've always kind of given her a pass and saying that I felt that somewhat affected her mentally, especially throughout the series, because if you look at the way Chi-Chi changed, she changed throughout the series in terms of getting a lot more strict with Gohan as opposed to what he was before because of the type of lifestyle that she changed.
Is it weird, just real quick, that Bulma, or as MistareFusion would say, Bluma, is it weird that she is like wealthy and she never gave Goku and Chi-Chi any money, considering that they were like really close and that was like her first real friend? I always found that weird.
I don't think that's necessarily weird because, well, first of all, Goku doesn't need money. He can survive off the land, and maybe perhaps Bulma might give the family money because of Gohan or Chi-Chi. But in that case, although Chi-Chi does from time to time complain about not having enough to sustain themselves, but you kind of are living out in the middle of nowhere, so, or in a pretty remote area, so I don't know how much money would really serve them.
I mean, to be fair, you know, the Ox Demon King seems to have a lot of money, and she mentions that at one point, that they're almost out of money from that. That's years later. And of course, Goku has his Tenkaichi Budokai winnings, at least for a certain length of time, however long that lasted.
I actually want to go back because to the mindset of when I was first watching this as a kid. You know, I was watching Dragon Ball Z years back, and because I feel like a lot of people that watch Dragon Ball, you know, Dragon Ball Z in the way I did, they have this common meme that Chi-Chi was just very hot-headed. She was
Traditional Japanese mother.
well, yeah, but some people would use more colorful language, like she's just a bitch. I'll be honest, I never thought of her that way because even as a kid, the way I always saw Chi-Chi was, yeah, I understand that she was being portrayed as a stereotype, but the stereotype I thought it was being portrayed as was not necessarily a certain type of Japanese mother, because I had no idea about that. All I thought was that Chi-Chi was a very protective, a very involved and caring, strict mother. That's what I thought she was, and I thought that all her antics and all the things that she did were just manifestations of that. So I didn't really think that she was being mean-spirited or anything when she was doing what she was doing. In a way, I think that I excused her behavior because in Dragon Ball, I think other characters act in exaggerated manners. I think the series, especially sometimes in filler, tries to exaggerate how stupid Goku can be sometimes. It can exaggerate how perverted Master Roshi is. It can exaggerate certain characteristics like Vegeta's anger. So with Chi-Chi's nagging, as I felt that was just another part of the whole series. It was just, oh, this is the type of character and it's just exaggerating these traits. And that's the way I always saw him as a kid. Now, Chi-Chi was a very different person before Z.
Much like a lot of women, when they give birth, they change.
Honestly, I think Toriyama's statement was that people just change after they have children. The way Toriyama did it, I think, is in a very humorous way. Like, oh, she becomes this stereotypical Japanese mother.
Let me just add something really quick to what you're saying, Blackenfist, and it's dealing with kids. Another thing I wanted to show about Chi-Chi's transition is that after Goku died, and this is emphasized a lot more in the anime, seemed to be a lot less strict with Goten, and she allowed him to train. But if you look at Dragon Ball Super, we saw her basically saying, oh, we could get the best tutor for Goten. So in a way, what do you guys compare and contrast with the way Chi-Chi raised Gohan compared to Goten?
Well, I've always heard, I mean, granted, I was raised as an only child, but I always heard that its parents tend to really, you know, go crazy on the micromanaging for their first kid because they don't know what they're supposed to do. And so it's always all the manuals on parent raising, all the best toys, all the best education. And then by the time the second and third kid comes along, they've mellowed out a bit and they realize that they're not going to break their kid by holding back a little bit and maybe just getting weary of the whole process. And they just sort of have a more hands-off approach to later kids. So I don't see that as unrealistic that she have her second kid and be, you know, a little less strung out about it.
Personally, I was the youngest, and I obviously can sense that too, but I've always felt that that was a part of it, being that the parents kind of got a little bit older, and when that happens, that basically means that they're kind of a little bit more turtle-esque about the whole situation. But I've always felt that was a pretty interesting transition, how Chi-Chi was so much different on Goten as how she was with Gohan.
I think we've kind of covered our thoughts and the bases here. I always felt that Chi-Chi was a very misunderstood character, and especially how the fandom saw her, because she's a periphery character and it's very easy just to write them off. And I feel that because they're a periphery character, most fans don't really want to take the time to understand those characters. Chi-Chi's not not really the only character this happens to. I do think that other periphery characters in Dragon Ball this happens to when they get dropped off. They really like to understand these characters on like one note. I think sometimes even characters like Krillin, who are like major characters in the series, get this treatment even though they're much more involved in the series by the fandom. I don't know, I guess this is just something about the fandom. But any lasting thoughts about how the fandom sees Chi-Chi, Mr. Fusion?
This is a topic I sort of addressed on my Dragon Ball dissection video, is that I do think fans tend to see her as more inconsistent than I think she actually is, where it's like, oh, she was running around blasting dinosaurs. And by the way, I never really understood if that laser from her helmet comes from the helmet or comes from her, but yeah, blasting dinosaurs, and then she competes in a tournament, and then all of a sudden we get to quote unquote the Z era, and she hates fighting and doesn't want to wants her son to study, and like what happened to Chi-Chi? But I think she's very consistent, and if you think about her as a sort of traditional type of woman who believes that there's a certain time and place for everything.
Now, I will say this to add to what you're saying. She does get some development a little bit later on in the series, because when Goku wakes up from the heart virus, she pretty much tells her, we have to go train in the room of spirit and time, and she does not even fight it. She's like, fine, go ahead, and then I will worry about Gohan studies afterward, but you have to promise me that you'll let him become a scholar. So to me, I love that scene because it really does show development for Chi-Chi. It shows that she now understands at that point that this is getting serious, do what we can, and then the scholar nonsense can wait for later.
Yeah, but still, Chi-Chi's always been that kind of person who is having dreams about marriage. There's the filler arc with the wedding dress where she's striving to be the perfect wife, and then once she has a kid, she's striving to be the perfect mother. So she's always had that idea of, this is what I'm supposed to be, and I'm going to strive for that. Based on what point in her life she's in, it manifests itself in different ways.
And that makes her a good character, if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I guess that covers everything here, guys, but I really want to thank Geekdom and MistareFusion for being on this Thought for Talk. I really thank you for being on here, and please check out MistareFusion's Dragon Ball Dissection series. It is the best retrospective of Dragon Ball on the internet, so if you want a definitive Dragon Ball retrospective...
thank you so much for having me. Those words mean a lot coming from you guys. They really do.
No problem. Anytime. But anyway, guys, until next time we do another Thought for Talk, I'll be Blackenfist, and I'm out, man.
And please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day.